Hello everyone, Russ of Aquariumax here. Today's video is the third in a series on my dart frog vivarium build. Today's video will focus on adding the substrate, processing the plants, and finally planting the vivarium. The first order of business is to add the drainage layer. I'm using a material sometimes known as Featherlight. It's a recycled glass product that's very porous and very lightweight. It needs to be rinsed and strained before being added to the vivarium, and as I place it in, I'm trying to make sure that the depth is about 2 to 2.5 inches and that the layer is very even to help prevent the higher layers of substrate from being waterlogged. The second layer is simply a soil separator, which is just a piece of screen that will prevent the top layers of the substrate from leaking down into the bottom layers. And this next layer of substrate is where the roots of many of the plants go. It's where the microfauna tend to hang out, and it creates a nice breathable layer between the drainage layer and the leaf litter. Again, with this layer, I'm trying to pay attention to depth and evenness and provide a nice layer for both plant roots and for microfauna such as isopods and springtails. And now it's time to add some water to the substrate. I want to make sure that there is plenty of humidity, of course, for the plants and the dart frogs, and it's good to add this water after you add the substrate, as pouring it through, as any herpetoculture.com indicates, will get some of the tannins from the materials in the top layer of substrate here to percolate down to the drainage layer, and that is a beneficial thing. You want to have some of those tannins in that water. And then you can also monitor how much water is going in by taking a look at the drainage layer. You want maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch of the drainage layer to be covered, but you definitely do not want to reach the top of the drainage layer. Otherwise, your main substrate will be saturated, and that can cause it to start to rot. And now it's time to move on to plant processing. Now this is basically a procedure that helps remove any traces of pesticides and or pests from the plant. Some people skip this step, but my philosophy is it's always better to be safe than sorry. So the first thing to do is to remove the plant from its pot. You can gently ease it out or tap it out if needed, and then you begin to remove as much soil as you can from the root ball of the plant. With some plants, this will be fairly easy, like this philodendron has fairly resilient, fairly thick roots, so working out the soil with your fingers isn't that difficult. With some plants, it's a lot more difficult just because the roots are much finer. And there are also issues sometimes when some of the soil amendments like perlite get stuck between the roots, and you kind of have to work that out. It can take a while, but it's an important part of the process. Once you've worked out as much of the soil as you feasibly can with your hands, it's time to use water. Now you can just get a container of water, it doesn't have to be dechlorinated, and just sort of swish it around in there, and you'll probably have to repeat the process a few times. Honestly, it's a little bit easier if you have a large container or basin you can put in or near your sink and just aim the tap at it and run that water over the soil. Of course, you need to use that container to catch the soil, but if you can do that, it will help get all remnants of the soil off of the roots. Part of the process that I don't show here, but I should have, is the soaking period. It's really important to let the plants hydrate as much as possible for 10 or 15 minutes before going on to the next step, which, as you can see, is a bleach dip. I'm adding 1 1/4 cups of bleach, household bleach, to 1 gallon of water. This is the concentration recommended by any herp. They have an excellent tutorial on their website, which you can check out in the description for this video. Now, once you have added the bleach to the water, you can immerse the plants in that solution for about 2 minutes. You can actually go up to 3 minutes, but I usually go around 2, as this process, frankly, is somewhat stressful for some of the plants. Some of the plants seem to do really well with it and are not phased at all. Other plants are fairly stressed and tend to go through a dieback period after it. I understand that this is an important step because it does help, remove pesticides and pests, like I mentioned before, but it does kind of make me uncomfortable. And please ignore the fact that I'm using my bare hands to do this. I should have been wearing gloves. An extremely important step that I don't illustrate here, but I will explain, is to rinse the plants thoroughly. As soon as those 2 minutes are up, I dump the bleach water down the sink and immediately use the tap to rinse those plants as thoroughly as possible so that no traces of that bleach solution remain. And now it's time for planting. I always get so excited at this part. I'm putting a philodendron on the left, a rabbit's foot fern to the right of it, some selaginella in the bottom right corner, my bromeliads along the back up high, a small orchid that I've had for a number of years, a lemon button fern in there, and I temporarily moved that bromeliad, but I'm going to put it in a different spot. Just going to use some toothpicks to mount it, and there is the final place for that bromeliad. And now we're adding a nice deep layer of leaf litter. These are leaves that I purchased from Any Herb with a kit for the custom vivarium build, and a coconut hut, which is a breeding site for the dart frogs. There's a petri dish that goes under it, and I have two benefits of adding it. One is that the frogs may decide to use this as a breeding site, the petri dish to hold a little bit of water, and the coconut hut to provide a sense of security. But another benefit is that it can act as a prop to hold the bromeliad up a little higher. See this little stump-like configuration of cork bark with the bromeliad up at the top is intended to be the focal point of the vivarium. That's why it's kind of on the off-center to the left, and this enables the bromeliad to be displayed a little bit better because it's just a little bit higher up. There. I kind of like how this turned out. I mean, it still has to grow in, but I think it's looking pretty nice. Now it's time to add the microfauna, the springtails and the isopods. So I'm going to dig out a little divot in the leaf litter here so that they'll have a place to hide. And first of all, I'm going to put some springtails. The species I'm using here are Folsomia candida, a very fast breeding temperate springtail. And in terms of isopods, I chose Porcelionides pruinosus, the powder blues, because the adults are large enough that the dart frogs won't eat them, but they will eat some of the mancae or juveniles, and they are very fast breeding, so they'll serve well as a cleanup crew. And of course, I cover them up with the leaves to protect them from the frogs. Before adding the frogs, I give the vivarium a good misting. This is especially important. I mean, you always want to maintain high humidity in a dart frog vivarium, but you want especially high just as the plants are acclimating. There is typically some dieback with some of the plants. Like I mentioned, I think the plant processing procedure is kind of tough on some of them, and just the whole transplantation stress is a little bit tough on them. So it's important to keep the humidity high to help them acclimate early on. And then, of course, I made a mess of the glass with little bits of substrate and whatnot on it, so I'm giving that a good wipe down so that it can look its best for its new inhabitants. And there it is, all ready for the frogs. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Thanks for watching today. If you haven't seen the other videos in the series so far, you can check out that card up there. Please feel free to leave a like, a comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe. And then click the bell icon so you don't miss my next video.